All right, this is just a walkthrough of the in-class assignment, macrosVBA for the Multilingual Information Lifecycle course at Kent State University. Um, this project serves to um, directly build on what they learned in the Intro to Macros and VBA LinkedIn Learning course. And the whole reason for all of it in the first place is to introduce the concept of macros, which can be extremely useful when you're dealing with um, any type of digital information, as a time-saving tool. And I think starting out with a macro in Excel um, can be maybe easier than teaching macros in a text editor first. And second, it serves as an introduction to VBA, which is a really useful tool that's extensively used in the translation industry by those who deal with technical services. And so this builds on something they've already seen in the course, which is this freelance records Excel file. And we've got, of course, for example, on this translation sheet, each row in this table would be a project for like a translation project. So we've got the date, project name, language pair, all of the metadata for the project, domain, subdomain, source country, job source, built by hour or by word, the rate. And so this is something that you could, of course, fill in manually. Let's say it's January 25th, 2021. Project name, we'll put in a bogus ID number. And language pair, I don't know, German to English, domain, medical, subdomain, records, source country, Germany, job source, ProZ, we're billing by the word, let's say. And so you can see filling this out, there's some cases where if you do the same types of projects a lot of the time, and this is kind of a contrived example, but it's an excuse to throw a macro in. As we fill this out, things like words, that will change every time. Hours, that will probably change every single time. But there's certain things that you're filling in that will be pretty much the same every time you fill this in. So, for example, the invoiced and the paid cells, usually going to put no in there. The date, that's something repetitive that can be automated. The language pair, if you usually do the same language pair for most of your projects, then you can automate that. Same with domain. And so we're kind of taking that as an example, is these things like language pair, domain, job source, build by hour, by word, date, all of that stuff, that might be the same every time you fill this in. We're going to create a macro to automate that. And so the first thing you have to run through with the students is how to enable macros. I'm on a Mac right now, and so it's a little bit different, Windows versus Mac. On Windows, you would go to File up here, and then you would come down to Options, and it would bring up a menu similar to Preferences for Mac. So on Mac, you go to Ribbon and Toolbar, and I think on Windows it would be the exact same. You just have to make sure and customize the ribbon here that you check Developer so that the Developer tab will be visible. The Developer ribbon, I mean. And then on Windows, you'll go to something that's called, actually I forgot what it's called. Okay, this is kind of what it will look like. I went to the LinkedIn Learning course to see what it looked like on Windows really quick, but yeah, for Excel options, when you go to File Options, you'll have Customize Ribbon. You check Developer. It looks really similar. And then there's this thing called the Trust Center on Windows, and you go to Trust Center Settings, and that's where you go enable all macros and trust access to the VBA project object model. So that's the thing you have to have the students enable, and they'll have already seen this because they will have already done the LinkedIn Learning course, hopefully. But anyways, yeah, so on Mac it is under security, not Trust Center. On Windows it's under Trust Center. On Mac it's under security. You'd hit enable all macros, and then you would trust access to the VBA project object model. And so those are the settings we need to change. You teach the students to do that. And you could run through a simple macro like the one that he does on the LinkedIn Learning video where you're hiding and unhiding sheets. So for example, right now I can do a macro that is hide all except profits sheet. And hide all sheets except the profits sheet. I'm not going to create a shortcut key. So we hit OK. Select this, hold shift down and go all the way to taxes 2021. Right click and hide and stop recording the macro. And then we can record another macro where we're unhiding all the sheets. This will unhide all sheets. And so running through this with students just gets them used to, going to the developer tab, hitting record macro, entering the information, and then, going through the procedure for a very simple macro, like hiding the sheets and then unhiding the sheets. And for the unhide one, you can't select them all at once. You have to do it one by one. I suppose I probably could have just hit undo and it would have had the same effect for the purposes of the macro. But anyways, this just lets them record a simple macro, get used to it at first, kind of scaffold it a bit, and then you can have them look at the Visual Basic view, go to the module where the macros are saved. And so here, for example, hide all except profit sheet. That's a macro. We've got unhide all sheets. And you can have them look at the code there a little bit and also show them that they can now run the macros. So let's hide everything. It's all hidden. Let's do the other macro to unhide everything. And so those are two basic macros you can start out with. And this whole activity, I'm anticipating 55 minutes of class time for it, and it might be too much for that. So then the original macro that we wanted to teach, where we're putting in this redundant information, you can say, okay, let's record a macro where insert common info, and the description inserts common info to save time. I don't know, you could do a better description than that, I'm sure. And later in the Visual Basic area they can edit the description so it's more descriptive. And so we can insert a date here. And you can say, well, for our macro here, we want to insert today's date. How might we accomplish that? We can look up, for example, how to insert today's date Excel. And so kind of get them used to Googling things. And so insert the current date, control semicolon. Okay, let's try that, control semicolon. And we're still recording a macro right now. Hit control semicolon, tab, language pair, I don't know, German to English, domain, medical, subdomain, records, source country, Germany, job source, ProZ, built by Word, yes. And I just made a mistake there, and so that'll give us something, also to look at. You could do that deliberately, something to look at in Visual Basic that we need to edit. And invoice, no, paid, no. And stop recording the macro. And so now we can go look at what we just recorded, insert common info. And you can show them, for example, that here it's just going to insert the same date every time, the one that we just entered. That doesn't really help us. It doesn't automate things. And you can show them that if we try to run this macro again, that it starts out in the cell we picked and inserts the date, but it doesn't actually go across the row. And you can show them that the reason for that is because it's jumping to very specific cells. You're telling it to go to C2. Here in the first line, it's starting in the active cell, which is what we want. But later, it's jumping to a specific cell. And so you can kind of explain the code this way, that we need to find a way in Visual Basic to just go 2 cells to the right. And so here's another opportunity to challenge them to Google it and see what they come up with. And if they don't come up with it, then you can show them the solution. But go 1 cell to the right, VBA. And so here we've got something that we can look at. You can kind of introduce them to Stack Overflow if they've never seen it before. Here's an answer. To reference 1 cell to the right of the active cell dot offset. Like, okay, well, that's what we want. Let's try that. So instead of range C2, we're going to paste in that answer we found, active cell offset. But we don't want to go just 1 to the right, we need to go 2 to the right. So right here, we'll delete the 1 and put a 2. You can explain that this is movement in terms of rows and this is movement in terms of columns. And if we always want to insert German to English, then we've got that. But then we have the other problem of the date, and here's another opportunity for them to, Google something. The current date VBA, and we can, look at what code we need to insert to get the current date. Looks like it's just date with parentheses, and so we'll go back to that editor where we can edit the Visual Basic code for the macro. We'll insert date with parentheses. If we try to run the macro here, okay, we got it to insert today's date, we got up to language pair, but then we need to fix the rest. Alright, so all that needs to happen now is we need to keep editing the rest of these active cell offset so that we're not looking at specific cells here, but so that we're jumping over a certain number of columns in the same row. And so we can keep copying and pasting these, but changing the values as needs be. And I think once we get to here where we insert the W, then we need to change it because we're not just moving over 1. It's been 1, 1, 1, 1, and then we need to move over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And here's where you can try and challenge them and have them come up with this, these last 2 lines themselves. So we go over 15. And we go over 1. This last line of the macro we don't actually need, so we'll delete it. And now, if we delete everything we've tested so far, they should be able to make the date of the row they need to insert all this info in, the active cell, run the insert common info macro, and all of that info will populate. This is just a good way to introduce VBA to the students so we can look at more applications for it later down the line, and it also introduces just the general concept of a macro, which they can then use later on in the course in text editors as well.